Well, good morning, good afternoon, or should I say good day, depending on where you are, and joining us today to kick off our 2023 Standards for Professional Learning Week. I am Paul Fleming, Chief Learning Officer at Learning Forward, and on behalf of Learning Forward staff and affiliates and board members and community members and Learning Forward family, we are so excited that you are joining us today to be part of this exciting annual week now for always the last week of April. And if you see on the next slide, as we begin, we are 1 year in, and as we mentioned, this is the second annual Standards for Professional Learning Week. And again, super excited to be part of this and have all of you here joining us as we go through the week. And so you'll see on the next slide what we have in store for you, beginning today, the same time every day at 3 p.m. Eastern, starting with 1 year in, how we're advancing outcomes for all learners. We will be featuring one tool each day, and as you can see on the schedule laid out, starting today with that appropriate measure for each tool to be featured. We will also be having special guests along the way, and we also want to let you know that all of these sessions will be recorded, and you can see at the website below our standards.learningforward.org. They will be available, as well as we invite your questions, your comments in the chat, because we will be having an interactive part of each day at the end of our webinar. We also want to let you know about an optional standards lab that will take place for 30 minutes immediately following every day from 4 to 4:30 p.m. Again, this is voluntary, it's optional, but we hope that you stick around and use the link that will show up in the chat today towards the end of the webinar to join us for a more interactive look at each tool and each feature. So as you see, we'll be talking about the tool Advancing Outcomes for All Learners today. Tomorrow we'll be looking at elevating educator voices and behaviors by featuring our new hot off the press vignettes and innovation configuration maps. On Wednesday, we'll be taking a policy pathways approach and looking at an exciting new tool called Policy Pathways to Standards Implementation, followed by Thursday, again, the revised and updated standards assessment inventory that we know that many of you have used in the past with our previous set of standards. And finally, on Friday, April 28th, closing out with embedding equity for all and the tool selected resources for Equity Challenge. So you can see a full week. We hope that you will be joining us every day, same time here for Standards Week 2023. And with that, we're going to briefly introduce our special guest for today, Dr. Segun Eubanks, who's the director at the Center for Education Innovation Improvement at the University of Maryland, and also past board president at Learning Forward from 2022. In a few moments, we'll be having a casual conversation about what he sees as an expert, the challenges around and the progress for standards implementation, and especially for advancing all outcomes for both educators and for students as well. So we're excited, and again, welcome Dr. Eubanks to our webinar today. So we want to start today, though, with a quick overview of the standards and mention a few things, especially around what is different this time. And we know how much the field has changed in the last 10 years, and we also know how much research and evidence has been accruing over time in the last decade that we now have the opportunity to formulate, to do a literature review and meta-analysis conducted by AIR, and found, if you see in this second bullet, that rigorous meta-analysis found, right, that program alignment with the 2022 Learning Forward standards is associated with both improved teacher instruction and also student achievement outcomes, which we believe is powerful. Next slide, please. So this AIR meta-analysis is a featured resource on our website for the standards website. And we wanted to share just a couple of highlights and takeaways from the meta-analysis and the literature review with our good partners at AIR. And so as you'll see on the next slide, the importance of some of the overview and the findings, right? One, that each of the standards was positively associated with both improved teacher instruction and significantly associated with better and more positive student achievement. You'll note that the range of these effect sizes, that there was a range, but all were significantly different from zero. We'll also note that there was a positive but non-significant effect for the revised leadership standard, and we'll be continuing to work with AIR to investigate why this is and pointing to other research. Now, a couple other pieces we want to point out on the next slide for these findings, especially on teacher instruction, and this is thinking about the effect sizes and the statistically significant effect sizes for each one of the 11 standards. And you'll see that all of them, just about all of them, have that statistically significant effect size. And I want to point out that the three, one in each frame, that were the highest, including culture of collaborative inquiry, the professional expertise, and the curriculum assessment and instruction in terms of having significant positive impact, which we know is not a coincidence when we think about the content contained in each one of those three standards. And as I actually note, two of those standards come from the rigorous and inclusive content section. You'll also see on the next slide the findings for the impact here on student achievement. And this also had many of the standards, in fact, just about all of them, that were statistically significant. And also want to highlight and point out the three new equity standards having a significant positive impact on student achievement, being equity foundations, equity drivers, and also equity outcomes for students. And that is certainly, again, not a coincidence, as we know and believe in the importance of those constructs that are in each one of the equity standards as well. So as we move on in the overview, we also note that as you saw what we believe is our change theory, right? That high quality professional learning needs to be anchored in the standards for professional learning. And as you saw, the significant research and evidence that came into the 2022 standards in order to get on the far right those improvements in outcomes for each student. But we also know then the alignment that takes place when high quality professional learning is grounded in the standards, and then knowing the connections to both two things, right? Growth in educator knowledge, skills, and beliefs, one, and growth in educator practice, and how those are intertwined and connected. And that's why you see, especially on the visual, how those two are intentionally connected in order to get better, more significant outcomes for each student. So we believe this change theory of how standards lead to improvement for all learners is an important part of why, as we'll be talking today with Dr. Eubanks, both of the benefits and the challenges of embedding a systems approach into your system, into your school, into your district, and into your state or province as well. And that's really a theme that if you look on the next slide, how this connects, right? We believe in by design, all 11 standards need to work in concert within a system framework. We know that systems benefit when they have the alignment and the tight alignment with all 11 standards, rather than just a pullout of one or two standards as a focus. And in fact, the tool that you'll hear today from my colleague, Michelle Mills-Miles, who's our Vice President for Standards Outreach, will be talking about and showing this tool called Advancing Outcomes that demonstrates the importance of not missing or skipping or unintentionally leaving out one or several of these standards, and how important that is as well. So that takes us to, again, a quick overview and reminder about the grouping of our 11 standards into three frames, right? The rigorous content for each learner, which actually shows now our three new standards: equity practices, curriculum assessment, instruction, and professional expertise. Also within the transformational process frame, that is a grouping of 4 deliberate standards, and then followed by the conditions for success that also has that intentional grouping of 4. And as you'll see now on the next slide, how these connect, right? So when we think about rigorous content, we know this is the what of professional learning, right? What do those equity practices look like in the classroom? How aligned is your curriculum assessment and instruction in your system? And what is the professional expertise needed, right, for each educator to thrive? And so we think about this frame is providing the what and the content for each learner, noting again, learner is by design for adult learning and also for student learning and the impact that it plays. This is followed by what we call the transformational processes, which we know and many of you know and are using to think about the how, right? and to think about what is the connection between equity practices, the evidence that's used, the learning designs that need to be implemented, and finally, what we call the implementation with integrity for those standards. And so those are by, again, design, very deliberate and put into the process frame. And then finally, that follows with our last frame with the conditions for success. And again, think about the grouping here and the connections. We know that especially, for example, school leadership has a huge impact on these other constructs and standards that are in this frame, namely, what is the vision for equity found in the Equity Foundations? What's the culture of collaborative inquiry and the culture of providing time and space for educators to come together? And then finally, what are the resources that are necessary to do that? And so we see that a tight connection between the four that are in the conditions for success frame as well. So all of this, as you see, leads to now how we think about different ways that we're seeing in the last year, educators diving into the standards. This is one example, right? These are the summaries, and this is found on the standards website as a way of really being able to look quickly at what are the key constructs in each standard. And this is one entry point, as we know, that educators are using in systems to get a better understanding of the standards, as one example. Followed by, if you see on the next slide, how each standard and what this looks like in the standards book, as we affectionately call it, that has here these four pieces, right? We know that each standard by design has the common stem, right? That starts with professional learning results and equitable and excellent outcomes for all students when the three components or concepts that are included in the rich narrative for each standard. Third, the linkages and the connections to other standards and how they work together to create a system. And then finally, fourth, what is that research at the end that supports each standard? So we also know that for many of our learners, this is a huge asset, is to be able to dive deeply into the standards book and to explore the narrative of each one of those standards as well. So this is followed up as we wrap up the outlet here, or the overview, to also note that by design, equity is threaded throughout each standard and in each frame by having a separate equity standard that are connected to each other, but one that is a standalone in each frame: equity foundations, equity practices, and equity drivers. Because we know that systems, as you saw from the AIR meta-analysis, are getting better and more positive outcomes when equity is the through line and is in the DNA of a system. And so when equity is in a school, it's in a system, and it's in a state at that level, it's going to be successful in all of its nuances of how that is done and how that is contextualized for a system. And by design, as you see, that there are the three connected equity standards, right? This also, if you look now, going to this last piece, we wanted to give you a snapshot about what the standards website was generating in terms of the last year, since we are now officially a year from the launch of the standards in April of 2022. And so you can see, over 160,000 page views, right? You can see almost 6,000 tool downloads of all of the first set of tools that were made available, including the action guides for everybody on the public website, the number of video views, and also we don't have here the actual showing of each country, but it's powerful to see that the vast majority of the 193 countries in the world actually visited the standards website, and you can see the number of views there too. So we know that there's a global reach to the standards, and I think that is shown here as gaining momentum. Finally, I would show just as a note, a reminder that we do have the standards website for additional resources, and this is where all of the tools that you'll be learning about and seeing this week, including today, are going to be referenced for you. But we also wanted to show what was already there, including the meta-analysis, including all the quick start guides for and role-based action guides for different roles, and also the innovation configuration maps that will be a feature for tomorrow's webinar as well. So with that, we will now continue and to look at go back to our special guest here and Dr. Eubanks. Thank you so much for being here. And we want to have now a more informal conversation, right, about your experience, your expertise, and think about what that looks like for you and in your role. So would love to just start by asking you, to think about where do you see learning forward and the field kind of headed in this year in 2023? And how do you see that building upon the successes from 2022 as well? So again, welcome and great to have you here.
Thank you, Paul. It's wonderful to be here. I'm excited to see a large audience of educational leaders engaging with us in this discussion today. And thank you, Paul and Michelle and the whole team for your continued work in this effort. So I'm honored to be here to chat with you just a little bit about where I think we're headed and a little bit about where you go. I'll start with that second part. You talked about kind of building on the successes of 2022 and for learning forward, what a whirlwind year 2022 was for us on the board and our staff and in our affiliates throughout the nation, coming out of the pandemic and really trying to build momentum back in our schools and in our communities. And so for us, I think the place that I'll start is our conference in December, our sold out conference that showed just a tremendous excitement for folks, not only wanting to come back in person and to network and to dialogue, but to really re-engage in this work of professional learning in real ways. And so we had record-setting numbers of people presenting and attending the conference. And it really showed that we're rebuilding the momentum across the country, focused on professional learning. So I'll start there. And then we had a transition in leadership, which ended up being wonderful for our colleague Denise Borders, who took on a well-deserved retirement and is now spending great time with her family, and so wonderful for us and for the community that we serve to have our friend Fred Brown, who I'm sure everybody who knows Learning Forward knows Fred Brown and the tremendous work that he's done. And so we really spent that year kind of reinvigorating this leadership. And in fact, Paul, if memory serves me correctly, I think we even recognized your tremendous leadership with a new role and probably a lot more on your plate. And so we really are kind of coalescing our leadership around doing the work that it takes. And of course, we did this little thing about releasing a new set of standards after quite a while. We listened to our educators across the field. As you pointed out so well in your introduction, we really paid attention to the research. And for those of us in the higher ed community, there's been that long talk about what is the evidence of the impact of professional learning. Well, that evidence is building, and the evidence that high quality standards lead to improving the skills and knowledge of educators and how they change their practice and how they impact student learning in real ways is really beginning to emerge. And you see all that embedded in the standards here, as again, you so eloquently summarized for folks. And so our real work ahead in 2023 is really just beginning, because as high of a mountain that was to climb to develop and introduce these standards to the world, they don't mean much if they're not applied in our classrooms, in our school districts every day. That we don't really change the narrative that too many of our educators have seen with insufficient professional learning that isn't high quality enough to really create the kind of outcomes that we need to create. And we've set the standard now with these standards to do that. And so the name of the game in 2023 is implementation, implementation, implementation. It's advocacy, advocacy, advocacy. It's outreach, outreach, outreach. You just talked the few slides back when you talked about the numbers and that momentum. This time next year, those numbers should be increasing exponentially when people start to really use and engage in these standards. So really, that's what I see with the work ahead. You may recall, probably you're the only one who might remember when we had this conversation a year ago, and I said standards that sit on the shelf aren't what the field needs. We didn't see the professional learning standards don't work in the way some other standards work. And so it's our individual and collective responsibility to put them to action ourselves and not rely on policies and other kinds of outside sources. This is the work of the field. So, and I'm really excited.
No, thank you so much, Dr. Eubanks. A lot of powerful themes as you're mentioning. And as you mentioned, you were here with us a year ago exactly, right, to do the kickoff. So I wanted to follow up on that theme, as you said, around just like realtors say location, 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 you're saying implementation, implementation, implementation. And so I think the question is, why is that so important to reach all learners? Because I think there's often a lot of thinking that this takes a lot of time. We have to be patient. We have to let, implementation unfold. But as I know you've said in the past and even today, this is critical, right? And so we'd love to hear a little bit more about your thinking about from where you sit, both at University of Maryland, but also in a national landscape. Why is implementation so important so that, we get these positive outcomes for every student and every teacher?
Sure. Well, look, we've in this field of education, particularly public education, have talked the talk of advancing outcomes for all learners. And to walk the walk, it really requires full-scale systemic implementation and systemic focus and systemic change, right? And so we have to pay attention to things like funding and resources and addressing the comprehensive needs of students, their academic needs, their physical and mental health needs, and their learning needs. And so it's going to require all facets of our education infrastructure to work together if we're going to be serious about that. And there's probably nothing more important to advancing outcomes for all learners than high quality teachers and leaders using high quality curriculum and instructional materials to really help students learn and grow. And so that's what the standards kind of sets up, right? We can have the best standards in the world and we can do all of this. The rest of the systems, if we're not paying attention to all those other systems, then we won't see the gains that we get. But if all of those other systems are working and we're not doing this critical work, we're going to fall short. And so this is really about the implementation of these standards and how they can really advance this work. If I had to click, I'd click all the way back to the slide that moves through the student to student achievement. But that's really what it means when we say all learners. And that's, to me, that's where we're headed.
Oh, thank you. And I think that's a powerful notion. And I think it really leads to kind of our last kind of official question for you today is also thinking, what's the connection with equity? We know certainly coming out of the global pandemic, there's certainly a huge need to make sure every student and every educator are getting their needs met. And we also know, given what's often described, right, is significant racial unrest as well in this country, and how important public education is a lever for equity and what that means. So just love to hear your thoughts as well about connecting the standards also to the equity needs that you're seeing, both again in your state and nationally too.
Absolutely. Look, what we know is quite clear is public education works for so many students. And when we say all, we know often what we're talking about is that our students who've been most historically marginalized, our students from minoritized groups, our students who are economically challenged are the ones who we're less likely to serve. And so for me, I love that our standards are grounded in these very issues and that we took them on head on. And I know we did so not lightly and not easily, given the incredibly complex dynamics that go on across the country around some of these issues when we say the word equity and um, all of the implications that it has. But I so appreciate that we took that on, because our students do perform at different levels, and they do so for lots of reasons. Some that have a lot to do with the educational opportunities that they've provided. So it's not just our equity standards, that's kind of throughout. When you look at our curriculum and assessment and instruction standards, right, and they focus on professional learning that helps students to both achieve at grade level and beyond. We know that students are learning in different places, and so it's not enough to move an often 1 year's growth in 1 year's time, right? We know how it works to really achieve. Many of our students need to accelerate their learning, and that's what high quality professional learning and high quality curriculum and the core implementation of these standards. I really hope that when they go to work in the field, they contribute to this idea that when we say all, it really means taking care of those who we already serve well, and then really serving those who we far too long haven't served well enough.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, and appreciate again the your sharing. And we know that as we even go through today in this webinar, we're asking folks if you want to put questions or comments in the chat, and so we'll have a chance to come back towards the latter part of the hour, Dr. Eubanks, right, for any follow-up. But again, appreciate your thinking, your expertise, and your experiences, especially with this kind of connection, right, between equity, high quality professional learning, and a systems approach. So thank you. And it's also then a great lead in. I'm excited now momentarily to introduce my colleague, Michelle Mills-Miles, who is our Vice President for Standards Outreach. And she is going to be unveiling, right? This is the kind of the world premiere of our first tool of the week with the How to Advance Outcomes for All Learners at this point. So again, Michelle, welcome, and excited to turn it over to you for showcasing our first tool of the week. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Eubanks, for that, that great background information about where Learning Forward is headed over these next 12 months. So we are super excited. First of all, thank you for being with us and sharing a bit of your afternoon with us as we unveil to the field our first tool of 2023, which is the Advancing Outcomes for All Learners. And you just heard Dr. Eubanks talk about how public education has done a tremendous job of educating many students. Yet there are those remaining groups of students, individual students that have been historically marginalized and just we've not yet been able to fully reach consistently. And so we are hoping that this tool will help to serve the purpose to close those gaps and to really reach those students, so that all students do indeed receive an excellent and equitable education. So on what we'd like to do is just start with a potential challenge that you may be facing in your system or in your school. This is certainly one that that many systems and schools throughout across the country, and as you heard Paul say, throughout countries across the world are currently struggling with. And that is that they are implementing standards. They are on the journey to really approaching professional learning systemically, and yet they are still experiencing some barriers to improved outcomes. So if this is you or any educator you know, or any system that you know, then this tool, we hope, will be one that serves you well. So the tool is designed, on the next slide, to really help educators connect their challenges with teaching and learning to the appropriate standard. So in other words, there you may be seeing symptoms. This tool can, in a way, is diagnosing symptoms of your system and helping to connect with the standard that is most likely to be able to meet that challenge and help you overcome and reduce, if not completely eradicate, those barriers. Secondly, this tool is designed to concurrently illuminate the positive impacts of the standards that you are implementing in your school or system. And it will illuminate those positive impacts, whether it's aligned to a single specific standard or the outcome of the standards that are being implemented well concurrently. So this tool serves at least those two purposes, and we are sure that you will be able to identify more and come up with other ways and other great benefits for this tool. So that is kind of the setting the stage and setting expectations around what this tool is designed to do. So let's go to the next slide and take a closer look. So what we're going to do, what you'll see on the next slide, is that we are going to do an overview of a kind of a flyover at a high level with the tool. And we will explain the anatomy of the Advancing Outcomes for All Learners tool to you. And then we'll dig a little bit deeper and pull out segments of the tool and take a close look. We have also put this tool in the chat, so you should feel free to follow that link to the chat. And oh, this is the link to the slide. Okay. Let's see. Are we able to advance? Okay, fantastic. Each of our tools you'll find follow a similar pattern, and we did this very intentionally. So a little background information about the tool, as well as ways to use the tool, are found on the first page. And then inside of most of our 4 pages, you'll find the content or the meat of the tool, as well as a set of reflection questions. And we always like to give you access to the 11 standards. So our standards wheel or our standards graphic will be embedded within each of these tools, along with the summary of the frames. So let's take a closer look on the next slide. The ways to use this resource are found on that first page. And in this, with this tool in particular, when you dig into the meat, it is laid out basically in 3 columns, as you see, or 3 components. So the first component, if you'll just click the next, it represents the missing standards. So this entire column lists challenges that you might experience or your system may be seeing if a particular standard is not in place or not in play or not being implemented fully. So if you are, for example, I know that's very small, we're going to take a closer look in just a moment, but if you are experiencing low expectations in your school or system, you'll find that challenge right there in that first bullet of the first column. And then our next column then takes you to the standard that is most closely associated with that challenge. And in the last column, then, once that challenge is implemented and integrated and applied with integrity, these are then the improved outcomes that you'll see in your school or system. And so we'll take a closer look in just a moment. But lastly, as I mentioned, the last key section here are the reflection questions that are designed on the next click to really guide you individually, or better yet, you and your team through discussions and really putting this tool to practice to help move those outcomes along. Okay, so I promised that we would take a closer look. And what we've done here is you notice the color coding of the three. And hopefully you're familiar enough with the standards and our frames to recognize that each of those colors are associated with one of our three frames. So this first segment, these three standards are those found in our rigorous content for each learner frame. And those in the middle, as you see, are equity practices, curriculum, assessment and instruction, and then professional expertise. So again, as I mentioned, the most common way that you'll use this tool is to enter on the left column. We invite you to scan. Even now, I will pause in just a minute and give you an opportunity to scan the bullets in the first column under missing standards. See if any of those are present in your school or in your system. And then you'll obviously see, connect that to the standard that's most likely to address or most explicitly or most tightly aligned with addressing that particular challenge. And then once you begin to put the supports and resources in place to implement that particular standard, then these are the improved outcomes that you will begin to see. So I'm going to pause for just 30 seconds and give you a chance to do that scan and take a look at the standards in these first three, this segment. All right. And as Paul mentioned, we will be having a standards lab, which is the 30 minutes following that will start at 4 o'clock Eastern, where you will get a chance to dig in a lot more deeply here. But hopefully you had a chance to scan and begin to see some trends or themes that even if you're not struggling with at the moment, you may have already implemented standards to overcome. So on the next slide, this is the segment associated with the transformational processes. We know that even with the best of the vision that's outlined in leadership, and even with the best curriculum and focusing on equity practices, if that content is not implemented in professional learning in a way that adheres to transformational processes, so if the evidence isn't used to inform the professional learning that's being designed, if the appropriate learning designs are not in place, if we don't have the feedback processes that are involved in implementation, then we will not see the outcomes that we want to see. So here are the challenges that are associated with missing those standards from the transformational processes frame. Now we'll give you just 20 seconds this time to do a quick scan. Thank you. And our last frame on the next slide are going to be the standards associated with the conditions for success. We know how critical it is for sustaining professional learning. So we could establish professional learning, we can have the great curriculum used to design it, et cetera. But if we don't have the conditions that are in place, if our resources aren't there to help sustain the implementation, for example, to sustain coaches to really engage in that job embedded ongoing professional learning that's required, we won't see our outcomes. If we don't have the leadership to set the vision for for professional learning and the vision for what we want our students to be able to achieve, then we will not see our outcomes. If the culture of collaboration, if teachers are not communicating with each other, if time hasn't been set aside to really allow educators to come together, to share their funds of knowledge, to engage in real-time problem solving around the needs of their students. And if those equity foundations are not in place that says we are committed to providing the best education for every student in our system, then, if these things aren't in place, we are not going to see the outcomes that public education promises. And so, so here again, we have a list of specific challenges that if you're seeing these things in your system, they should alert you to the fact that perhaps you need to focus, the system will benefit from focusing on the particular standard that's associated there. We know that with 11 standards and professional learning really still moving from a previous mode of professional development where we have, the one size fits all, or we're not considering individual educator needs, really moving to a systemic approach where we are considering all 11 aspects of the standards concurrently to build a robust infrastructure that will be able to sustain the learning that takes place. Without the conditions, then we will not be successful at creating a systemic system of professional learning, and we won't be successful at approaching professional learning through a systemic lens either. And so, again, if you're experiencing any of these challenges or barriers to student outcomes, then you may want to focus on the conditions for success standard. So I will pause another 20 seconds and give you a chance to scan the challenges associated with this frame. Okay, thank you. So, for example, you may be experiencing, or in your system, there may be distrust and division among staff. If that is a challenge that you have seen, then the standard to focus on and really dig into implementation would be the Equity Foundations standard. And once you begin to really dig into the narrative of the standard, use the tools, all the great tools that have been released and will be released this week to really focus on implementation there, then you should begin to see a greater shared commitment to successful outcomes for each learner, more trust being built among your staff, and a greater sense of cohesion and community among staff that would certainly trickle over to student population. Just picking out another challenge here from the next standard. If you have some students who are really excelling, but as you look at your, whether it be your end of year data, or better yet, with an ongoing process, maybe common assessments that are being done quarterly or by semester, you see a group of students falling through the cracks. That may indicate that there is an issue with the culture of collaborative inquiry. So there may be pockets of excellence in parts of your system, which indicate you maybe have more advanced educators or more experienced educators, while those falling through the cracks may be the result. There are, I'm sure, many reasons, but part of that may be that the learning and expertise of some is not being shared or translated to an entire team or to an entire department. And so then a focus on culture of collaborative inquiry, in that case, where you really begin to emphasize a shared culture of excellence, you really emphasize the importance of coming together to create those common assessments, to share the learning and take a collective responsibility for students would benefit and help reduce that challenge. And then quickly looking at the last two standards here, I'm just going to pick out the first one. There seems to be a lack of shared commitment to professional learning. So again, kind of back related to the pockets of excellence, if you have a segment of educators who are really hungry and taking advantage of professional learning, but you have a system where it's optional and others are, for whatever reason, are not engaging in that professional learning quite as often, then you want to take a look at the leadership standard and ask yourself and learn from that standard, how can the leadership put structures in place, put expectations in place, and also just make it more clear the opportunities that there are for professional learning. And lastly, we'll wrap this up by taking a look at barriers that are indicative of the missing resources standard. If you're seeing professional learning being implemented, but there's no return on investment, so you're just not seeing the outcomes, it may be that there's a problem with resources. So you may have had a short burst of success, but it has fizzled out, or that it has fizzled out. And maybe because their resources are not in place to continue to support educators in that way, or the materials that are necessary have not been allocated, or it may be an issue with time, but it's indicative of some problem with the that could be solved or addressed through the resources standard. And once that is in place, ideally, then you would begin to see the impact of those resources and the impact of the professional learning in that way. So as I mentioned, each one of these tools comes with a set of reflection questions. The reflection questions are posed, many of them to be answered by a team. We understand the power of collaboration, and we know how powerful it is when a team of leaders or a team of educators come together to collectively address a problem or a challenge. So here's just an example of some of the questions that align with this particular tool. So what I'd like to do very quickly, if possible, is take a look at the strategies slide so that we can share a few ways to, a few strategies for using this tool. And then after that, we'll take a look at kind of some step-by-step action steps that dig a little more deeply and a little more specifically in what you can do when you get this tool in front of you. So a few strategies that we recommend are that, as I mentioned, that team and that collaborative piece, you facilitate a team conversation using this advancing outcomes for all learners as the central text. And when you get together with this tool in front of you, we hope that you can use it to reveal those connections between challenges. So you would collectively identify challenges that you're seeing, and then again, you'll see the correlated standard. And we hope that that sparks really meaningful conversation about the standards that you're implementing well and how you can use those. I'm kind of dipping into bullet 3 here, how you can use the strengths of those, the professional learning associated with those standards to inform how you can develop professional learning for those that are missing. But that team perspective and that team conversation is going to be really key here with this tool. And just the last here, we also invite you to share this tool with stakeholders. This will give them an opportunity to reflect on how important it is to have all 11 standards in place. We talk over and over again about this comprehensive approach to professional learning. And we think that this tool really reflects all the positive outcomes that that a school system will see when you have the 11 standards in place. And so moving on to specific action steps. When you're with that team, as I kind of walked through before and tried to model for you, the recommendation is to do a complete scan of the missing, the challenges in that missing standard column. Locate the standard or multiple standards that are associated. So once, take your pen or pencil, circle or highlight the greatest challenges that you're seeing. Go over and see the aligned standards, and then do a team study. We invite you to pull out your standards book that Paul mentioned earlier. To dive into those narratives and really get to know what the standards say about that particular aspect of professional learning, and then create a plan collaboratively. Develop a plan for how to move forward with the standard based on what you read, based on the use of the other tools. And then get to work trying to put that plan in place. And lastly, we recommend that you still make sure you follow up. Select a time to follow up to monitor progress or modify the plan based on the evidence that you are seeing over time. And so the next slide. So that is the overview of the Advancing Outcomes tool. As a reminder, this tool, as well as additional resources that have already been released and will continue to be released, can be found at standards.learningforward.org. And I believe that we have time to take a few questions that you might have for those of you who have questions in the moment.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michelle. And I want to connect to one aspect you mentioned of the tool you just showed with a question in the chat about the use of artificial intelligence and ChatGPT specifically, because as you mentioned, Michelle, the importance, right, of systems thinking about and educators thinking about a professional learning plan and the importance of a professional learning plan. But we also know a plan is only as good as the content that goes into the plan. And so I think the question, and both for Dr. Eubanks and also for you, Michelle, and feel free either one of you to take it, is to think about what are the implications of AI and ChatGPT, because we know, for example, teachers are spending about 5 to 10 hours a week right now trying to find high quality instructional materials, right? And so the thinking is, could artificial intelligence really identify on the front end much more quickly high quality instructional materials? But we also know that's only as good as what the content is that it is using in the search in order to populate what it would be like a high quality instructional material or a high quality professional learning plan. And so I think that's another benefit of why our standards are evidence-based, right? Our standards actually have these kind of high quality constructs that are evidence-based to hopefully direct people, like in the tool, to implement, right, to get actually the outcomes they want. So that's a long way of asking a question for either one of you to comment on. What do you think would be maybe the possibilities of ChatGPT, but also maybe the any constraints or challenges? And maybe Dr. Eubanks, maybe we'll start with you first on that.
Sure, it's a great question, and interestingly, one of my colleagues at the University of Maryland is studying the use of artificial intelligence to give teachers real-time, personalized, and private feedback on their teaching. And so, imagine the possibilities. One, of course, we have to embed the standards and the high-quality resource materials and the modeling into, the artificial intelligence is only going to kick out how valuable we put into it. So I'll go back to my implementation. But imagine, just as the gentleman, I think Nick it was, who put this in the chat, that you can go in and not only be able to align practices to the standards, but to be able to record a lesson and get feedback about about where and how, and use it in your professional learning community work, and so it's, there are all kinds of possibilities, and just with a lot about AI, there's all kinds of dangers and potential misuses that can bring you in a million different directions. It's kind of like the internet. You can find the right thing, and you can find a lot of wrong things. So if done well, there's great potential.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's certainly, I think what Nick in the chat was asking, and also even the idea of, we mentioned, like, could we take the meta-analysis and how that could be used, right, to help inform what is high quality professional learning, now that there's an evidence base there too. So Michelle, any quick thoughts on that as well? Just the possibilities or implications. And I also just quickly mention, I guess, tomorrow's tool around vignettes, it would also be an example of an exemplars that we developed that are evidence-based to really get better results and more positive outcomes. So yeah, so Michelle, I wanted to see any quick thoughts.
Not much to add there, Paul, to what Dr. Eubanks was saying, but just to reiterate, and I see that Helma put in the chat here as well, that teachers still have to know whether the effective strategy that is suggested by AI really is effective. And so, there will always be the need for that human expertise, no matter how wonderful technology gets, but we always need to continue to do our own research and continue to be informed and use the technology, absolutely as a tool to help with efficiency. But that expertise, I think, we always want to keep that for ourselves and never let go of our own professional learning and not depend on the AI to solely or totally direct us or provide the last answer, if you will.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Michelle. And I'm reminded by one of the pieces you mentioned in the tool today about the challenge of one size fits all, right? The one size fits all professional learning that unfortunately educators experience. And what you just said was like the call to action for how we still need really smart, committed, compassionate educators to think about the design, the implementation, and evaluation of professional services, right, and professional learning. So great point. Well, again, thank you for those pieces. Thank you for those that put that in the chat. We are going to be wrapping up today just with a couple of reminders about some upcoming pieces, as well as the link that you can access for our standards lab that will be happening momentarily. So one, we hope you join us again tomorrow, same time, for a similar discussion around elevating educator voices. And if we can put that back up on the screen, that would be great to show those slides that we have for the rest of the week, because you'll see that schedule that is there. We also will have, thank you. So you can see each day, and again, as we mentioned, we'll have special guests, especially on Wednesday, with a district leader from Macomb, Mississippi, Betty Wilson McSwain, and also our very own CEO, Fred Brown, joining us on Friday with embedding equity as well. Also, a quick reminder on the next slide about, as Dr. Eubanks mentioned, the Sold Out 2022 conference. We're quickly seeing a lot of interest in our annual conference this year, later in Washington, D.C. for in December 3rd through 6th, which we're super excited about. And you can see the keynote speakers here as well. So that registration now is open. So important that you don't waste time, because we do anticipate it's going to sell out just like last year. And then finally, again, we ask you if you are able to join us in a separate Zoom link to have time in this next 30 minutes to join us in the standards lab, to share your impressions, ask additional questions, and hear more about the context. So we will be seeing you momentarily there. Again, thank you to Dr. Eubanks for all of your experience, your expertise for the work of Standards Week. Thank you to Michelle as well, and for all of you for joining us today. This officially wraps up day one, and we will see you back tomorrow again at 3 p.m. Eastern to start the second day of 2023 Standards for Professional